Very good. So we have about 30 minutes to follow up on the presentations, but I also want to welcome two new guests to this panel. And interestingly, both have the same first name. So I'm a little bit challenged here, but I will make it work. So why don't we start with Miguel Gaspar from SAP. Want to do a quick introduction about your role and a little bit about also the theme before we get into some questions.
Thank you very much. Indeed, two Miguels on the table that know each other since some time already, right? I'm a bit older maybe, you are younger, Miguel. But obviously very proud always to be together with you in this stage. My introduction from my side. So I work for SAP. I'm heading up the overall industry for SAP utilities, right? So this is a very strong and important industry for ourselves over many, many years. And I had multiple roles in SAP in the last years. Since the beginning of this year, I took the global responsibility for the industry. And a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for hosting me.
Thank you. Then we have Miguel Sanchez Forni. Did I say it right? Yes. Good. Your turn.
Thank you, Rolf. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. Just as an introduction, as Joe Torres, the CEO of ADP, said yesterday in the summit keynote, as him, I am an electrical engineer. So that's perhaps this is an important point to remark. I have been working 43 years for the same utility, Iberdrola, so I have been able to see many places and many activities there, so I know I have the experience to talk about any utility. After that, I was retired, and now I am the Secretary General of the Prime Alliance, which is an association very similar to what we have heard to the Meters and More. It's an association of 65 companies trying to approach real interoperable solutions for telecommunications in smart grids. Okay? And last, as bio, I have to say that now I am very much involved in the university in Comillas, Madrid, as well as in the Strathclyde, Glasgow, UK universities. So I am doing some master. I am the director of a master degree in smart grids. So that's the summary that you asked me, Rolf.
Yeah.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Anyway. Yeah, you're welcome. So if I just may summarize a little bit, sorry, I don't want to hide here. What we heard earlier. So I think there's three maybe themes I heard, and we can kind of run with this through this panel. But digitization has to address flexibility. I think that's what I heard many times across generation, delivery, and the demand side. So from a, obviously, commercial, industrial, and residential perspective. Also, I think, Peter, you mentioned, we always talk about electricity from the utilities, but there's also water, gas, waste. There's other elements, very important elements of the utilities we have to think about when we talk about digital transformation. So I think that's one important aspect. The second one, I think networks also have to be ready. So I think all the data analytics and digital transformation, the networks have to be ready to deal with it and comply with it and have the flexibility. I think that's from the TSO, DSO perspective, that's a lot of heavy lift, you have to do. We heard earlier in the keynote also from the Danish Energinet example. And the third one is the consumer. I think several of you had consumer or customer centricity on your slide, and I often like to say that the dynamics really flip. It used to be always think about CapEx, big new projects, big nuclear power plants, big coal, and now it's really driven more by the consumer, C&I, and the residential, what happens there and how that drives the TSO, the DSO, and the generation. So I think it's quite interesting part. And obviously, they will participate more, but they also have to see the benefit, right? It can't just cost them much or to be complicated. It has to be beneficial to them. So with that in mind, I thought I want to ask each of you actually kind of one question for all of you to start answering. But digitization is still a very broad term, right? We talked about. And what do you think are the key dimensions and what's really important from those dimensions the utilities have to think about when you say digitalization? Maybe we'll start with Peter and work over here.
Okay, so as a DSO, we are in connections. Connections is a key word in, as a DSO. So I think that the whole transformation, the whole digitalization is also about connecting. And I see it on 3 levels. So first of all, I'm a bit concerned about the fact that we don't see digitization beside the existing world. So it will be very important that we connect with the physical world, with the physical grids, and that all what we invent on top of it still is connected with that. Another layer I see what connecting is about is in the ecosystem. So what I said earlier, it's we will have to build solutions together. So we will have to connect with all players in the energy business. A very important point there. And then I also see the connection with the customer. And there I'm a bit concerned about affordability. So we do have to install equipment. We do have to enable the customer to transfer his data, to connect with the digital world. And there in our company, we see a lot of benefits in doing it multi-utility. And what we mean by that is looking for synergies with other utilities, water, gas, but also telecom. Like we also see benefits in like making a direct step towards fiber to the home when we do the digitization of energy, doing it in an affordable way, doing it multi-utility, so the customer has the benefits for his whole utility set.
Okay, very good. David?
Yeah, I would like to answer to the question in 2 different angles. First of all, from a TSO perspective, I think, like you mentioned, there are for big central production power plants are going away. So there's a new way of generating electricity that we see coming. So this needs also, as a TSO, to adapt to the flexibility that is offered by those new generation facilities, but also by the demand, and to adapt our balancing products, for example, as a TSO, and to be able to capture all that flexibility that is available. We can't rely on 2 or 3 machines like we did in the past, but we need to rely on millions of delivery points in the future. So from a utility point of view, a TSO point of view, that is where digital then is coming in, helping us and at capturing all that flexibility and then making the processes work in order to balance the grid, because in the end this is still necessary in the energy industry. So from the TSO point of view, that would be my answer where digital is coming in. From a consumer perspective, I think also a little bit with the same evolution that we see, that big power plants are going away. Demand will have to follow now generation. So we are at the front of the paradigm shift, like we talked a lot. And there, of course, if demand has to follow the generation, a lot of digital technology will have to come in. I give always the example, but I mean, I hope the algorithms will be smart enough to charge my car, my electrical vehicle, when it is the best combination of both, the best for the grid, but also the best for my own comfort level that I'm aiming for. And there we see also a lot of applications that will strive to have that paradigm shift in place.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, to that point, there's a lot of innovation happening in this space, and actually really pleased to see like how a lot of startups are also at the event. I think it's right here, the Initiate booth. So if you haven't seen it, there's a lot of companies. And I think also the interesting thing with the new tools, the digitization, cloud, you can have people, 1 person, 2 people become very innovative all the way up to the the Enels of the world. So it's a good time to be innovative in our space. So from that, it would be a good lead into SAP's.
Yeah, so a few thoughts that I have on that, right? So obviously, I think in particular we in our company, SAP, we used to elaborate a bit on the digital utility transformation proposition years ago, digital transformation, all that. But to be honest, I always found it a bit too vague, right? And in the meantime, I think we elaborated on something that I think it's much more concrete. and where in particular SAP, I think, has really something to say very strong, which is this idea of the intelligent enterprise proposition, right? Making enterprises intelligent, right, and making them doing things in a new way, right? Obviously, you know, incorporating another levels of data, higher levels of granularity, more automation, intelligent technologies, and all that. But again, I also think that these type of things are still a bit too generic. And then I kind of spent some time on that, and I came up with something that I think are really fundamental attributes of this intelligent enterprise that I would like also a bit to share with you, and I might also say a few other things on that one later on in my presentation. And this was for me, when I look at this intelligent enterprise enablement, I always think about, I came up with 5 things that I think are very, very important. And if we touch those 5 things, I think we are really complete in terms of this paradigm, which obviously it's just one element of the entire digital transformation that we are aiming to achieve. So number 1 for me is a topic on execution, right? Automating assisted execution to the business processes, right? So obviously every one of us, we hear about artificial intelligence, machine learning and all that. But really what we are looking at is really automating the execution of particular business processes, right? And obviously, in many times, and we are doing that with the help of machine learning, right? Going to particular cost-driven processes and being able to automate, and with that, release time from people for value-added tasks, right? Take them away from the repetitive type of work and have them spending time with really the activities that really bring value to the company. So that is number 1, right? Assisted execution. Then the other one, very important, is, I think you have touched on that one, is really the insight, right? Predictive insight, retrospective, correlating variables on your business, understanding what is going on. This is very, very important. So again, when you look at one particular use case, you need to have that dimension involved, right? Having the analytical element into there so that you really have the insight. And then obviously if you have the insight, then obviously you should also take action. And action is really for you to change and to adapt, right? This element of being able to innovate, to incorporate new elements in your business processes, to develop a new business practice. So that element is, for me, let's say the 3rd element, right? So sometimes I call it like do, see, change, right? Kind of automate the business process execution, getting the insight, and then adapt.
Yeah.
And then there are 2 things, just to close, right, that I think are equally important or even more important sometimes, which is this idea of collaborate. So as we are talking about energy transition, I mean, utilities will be in a coordinating more than in control as before. So if you want really to be coordinating, then you need to really leverage your collaboration capabilities with many other stakeholders, right? You need to manage ecosystems, you need to manage other task forces, right? Or competencies, all kinds of things that you need to do. So the dimension of collaboration is very important. And finally, to close, right, and this is something where we have been investing very strongly during the year, is this dimension of the experience management, right? There is always an element of experience measuring what exactly you are providing to your main stakeholders. It's not only your customers, by the way, it's to your vendors, right? To your partners, to your own employees, right? So those things are very, very important. And if you test, right, and if you test and you measure experience, then I would say that you touch these 5 fundamental attributes, which for me, I would say maybe they are not exhaustive, but they are quite complete in terms of the fundamental dimensions that we would like to achieve in a digital transformation type of initiative. Yeah?
And just to add to this, I think the tools, the entry point to doing machine learning, AI is becoming lower and lower. So you don't have to just hire experts for the tools, but you need experts on the business. Because, I mean, algorithms are only as good as they are correct and give you the results. So if you have, first of all, you have to have good data, but you also have to go people with business understanding, feeding those systems with the right information, building the right algorithms to have a meaningful outcome. So that's very important. It's good that the entry point in those tools becomes lower and lower.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that leads me to the alliances, and if you can please, from your point of view, talk about what digitization means. We said it's a very broad term, so what does it mean from your perspective and your members?
Thank you, Rob. You just mentioned a very important point, in my opinion, which is really the talent acquisition. You know, the knowledge of the people. It's not is needed to have the knowledge of the business, but also the knowledge of new technologies. But we will touch later on. Coming to your point on these key dimensions, I would select a couple of them. So I would select are the networks are ready to this really to this future, and the other one is the consumer. First of all, consumer, I fully agree that this has to be absolutely the center of our target. But taking into account also that the consumer will agree that we have an energy transformation very much driven by the climate challenge. Okay, so this is, in my opinion, a quite important point. And customers is the center. And what is really the customers? What are really the customers looking for? In my opinion, is clear. It's competition, freedom to act, and basically be sure that the minimum quality of service is achieved. And quality of service in an electricity product is something to remind always. Just think that if we lose the electricity here, we are going to have a lot of problems. Yeah. And this is something that perhaps we can think, this is something that is by assumed, this is absolutely granted without any problem. Okay, we have to preserve that. So this is quite an important point. But I mean, customer is the center, and then because electricity needs networks, are the networks ready for this digitalization? And perhaps I have to be a little bit, I will be a little bit provocative, but I have to say that no, not yet. Not yet. Everybody's thinking that it will happen tomorrow. The technology is there. But just think in the dimension and the difficulties of the networks. Let me put an example. I mean, Belgium, you have mentioned this project, this very good project of Internet of Energy in Belgium. Still, you haven't finished the rollout of smart meters. And I mean, that means that as of today, you are able to provide your services for the ones that are equipped with the smart meters. But what are the other poor guys that they don't have smart meters? Are you going to be, justifying that you are able to do something for good guys and not for the bad guys or the poor guys? So this is what happened in the smart metering rollout of the United Kingdom. I mean, we can speak a long time about that matter, but it has been. Just think about the results and the efficiency that they are getting. In France, we have learned. I have listened yesterday that Monsieur Molubu and Christian Bouchel from Enedis, they are installing 13,000 meters per week. 13,000 meters per week. In the United Kingdom, it would be impossible to arrive to that rate because of the way and the procedures that they are following. So Belgium is still not finished. I mean, I can put all of the many examples in Europe. Germany has not started to the real rollout of smart meters. Yeah. So, I mean, smart meters is going to be the beginning of all of this matter, because with smart meters, you are also installing a telecommunications network. Yeah. And telecommunications network, in my opinion, is the most important thing for the digitalization of the electricity networks. So there is, I mean, I could be keeping going, but my point is that still we need to do a rush in the networks to be ready and to put the networks ready for this new world that is coming, competition, new businesses. So this is absolutely a must. And we need to adopt the networks. And don't forget that networks are very linked to regulation. Yeah,
that actually leads me to a good to another question, and I'll start with David and then Peter, because what you're doing, I mean, you're talking about Internet of Energy, you're talking platform, you're talking technology. This a little bit seems to be out of the comfort zone, typically of a TSO, DSO, also with the regulators. So what do actually the regulators say that you, I think, more proactively addressing those issues? And you want to go fast, right? So you and you start with countries where there's a good meter infrastructure. Germany, sooner or later, will be there, hopefully also faster than we hope or think. So what is your view, David, from a regulator perspective? How do they look at you, what you do? Do you have to fight a lot?
Yeah, they're looking very closely, especially at the initiative that we launched here, and I think they're very aware of what we're doing, and they're supportive on the initiative that we take. They're full supportive, and as long as the sector is organizing itself to be able to deliver, they have a point of view that they don't have to interfere yet in what we're bringing forward. And they will look always at the boundaries, of course, and then put in place the boundaries if necessary. But for the moment, they're following quite intensively the project, and they're very happy, I think, with what we're doing so far.
Okay.
But just reflecting on other grids already, I mean, I find it a little bit limited if you just look at smart meters, and Peter will respond to that. I'm quite sure as well. But if I look at the DSO point of view in Belgium, we're already working with the DSOs on collecting flexibility from a long time. We are one of the countries way ahead on collecting flexibility from our grid, from the DSO grids. And even without working without smart meters. So I think I can understand the perception that you have that there's a question about are the grids ready. I can assure you that in Belgium we will do everything to be ready, and that's why we launched that program way ahead of facing problems. And I totally agree with you. We want to avoid to be at a certain point the blocking partner in that story. And I would repeat the question. I'm also a little bit concerned: is our market parties ready to offer that new services towards the customers? Because we're a lot of thinking, and here are more the providers of digital technologies in the panel. But are the big suppliers ready to open the market and to see at least a little bit their classical customer having another world and another demand than what they are facing now? And so is the sector as a whole ready? I think we should phrase that question more like this than just focusing on one group particularly.
Yeah, and then is Meters and Mores is also had the example of one, I don't know, number 2 on unbundled and bundled scenarios and deregulated. So it's challenging. You can't have one also solution for every single situation, right, across Europe. So that will be also the challenge. What's your view, Peter, from also your experience working with the regulators and?
So in our initiative, Internet of Energy, the regulator is really involved. So they really were part of the panel who's choosing the use cases. So I think that's for us a new experience, but also for the regulator. And what we are discovering there is that there is another way of a clear blueprint in advance, because that was the way we decided yes or no to go for smart meters, and we know that can be a long process. So what we are discovering now is that there is another way. If you co-create, and it's like with minimum viable products, you can go fast, you learn faster, and so we are discovering together with the regulator that new style. And it will be challenging, because now we are like in an opposite motivation, like the tools will be there, and we will still be rolling out our smart meters. But I think in a way it's better doing that. So we are installing now devices that are asked for. So if we would have installed them like 10 years ago, the risk was there that we installed devices nobody knows what they would be used for. So now there is like a pull from the market, from the developers of new solutions to have the meters installed. So it will be a pressure on timing, on planning, but there is really a market question coming out. Yeah.
Okay, good. Maybe before I ask the audience if there's questions, Miguel, Gaspar, from your perspective, what innovative solution, do you have some examples on use cases? What kind of innovation do you see with your customers taking place?
Yeah, there are a few. But Rolf, you said before we have the questions from the audience, maybe to the topic of smart meters, and before I pick up on your question, I think maybe obviously this is a very special audience, but maybe we can have a bit of a feeling about how we are in this room here. So there is maybe two questions that I would ask everyone. You just raise your hand if you are fine with that. Question number one, right? How many of you have a smart meter at your private home? Very good. So,
I do too.
me too. And then I was going to ask you, right? So I think it was like 10%, I could say, right? Yeah. So roughly 10%. From those 10% that have a smart meter, how many of you can see right here, right now, your consumption? I think, can I say it's off? No, it's more than off, right?
Off.
It's more. You think it's off? Yeah, maybe off. Okay. So, okay, I saw the same questions being asked this week, this year in Brussels, right? There was a big audience, and I was surprised because the results were quite different, to be honest. Like 80% of the people in the room would have a smart meter, so that was very surprising for me. But then the killing question was the following one that I just asked to all of you, which is how many of you have access to the data? And indeed, I mean, in that particular group, you know, from 80% that I think I recall that had a smart meter, most of the people, right, most really, whatever, 90% would not have access to the smart metering data. So I think, you know, there are indeed these two challenges that we need to be aware. I think in this room here, we could see that we need to do a lot in terms of the smart meter rollout. So that is something that, I guess, coming to your point, we need absolutely to have that. But we should also not forget that we need absolutely to give visibility on that data, right? That is number one. And then obviously the regulations and all the things to allow to have the business models that can take advantage of that data, because sometimes we have the smart meters, we have people with access to the data, but there is very little that you can do with the current regulations, right? So maybe spending 1 minute on your original question. I mean, when we think about concrete applications, there are many coming out, right? So, I mean, if I remember the examples that I gave with these 5 dimensions that I think for me, they are very important, we tend to show now these chatbots, right? Where I think we can touch a lot of those dimensions, right? With the chatbot, you are automating a business process, you are providing a very good customer experience, you are getting an insight, right, from what that particular customer situation is. You are sometimes able to adapt to your particular customer situation and provide different alternatives to that contact. And I think the other thing that I said, it's very important for me, is you are doing this in a collaborative manner, right? And really, with zero cost. Right? You are not consuming the time of a call center agent, and you are able to do this in a moment of the day when people can interact with you as a utility. This is also very important, because if you do it with a call center agent, eventually he can only call people when people are at work and they cannot talk about these things. But with a chatbot, you can, you know, have this type of process going on in the time that, you know, people are in the public transport, right? Or they are at home and, you know, they are relaxed, they have time for these type of things. So that is very important. And then we have, you know, many other areas like predictive maintenance. We know that there is a big opportunity there, right? We have obviously smart metering integration and the energy insights that you can get, and then developing new products, adjusting your portfolio as a retailer. So there are many opportunities, right, where we should look at all those dimensions, and we do see, right, that many use cases can take advantage of these solutions to match those fundamental dimensions that I mentioned before.
Excellent, thank you. We have a little bit time, like 4 or 5 minutes. Is there questions from the audience? We would love to give you the opportunity. Anybody? There's a hand going up. Let's see if do you have another microphone? Yes, the microphone is coming, thank you. If you can just introduce yourself also, your name and the company you're with, that would be great. It's right here in the front. No, one more?
One more.
Hello, my name is Bonaldi. I'm a freelance journalist, and I was wondering, why are you installing this in such a geostrategic region as Chile, Peru, and Bolivia, as far as, well, what I saw on the map? Is it going to be a transnational installation, or what is it? Why did you choose that exact point? That is one.
I'm glad you stayed.
One question to David about the buffer space. There was something on one of your pictures there on the right. It was the whole thing was supposed to be also a buffer space. What is that buffer space? Buffer space?
Do you want to take the
Um,
first question?
That's it. And there's one more.
Let's start with
one
those.
more. Yes, the comparative. This comparative in the with your neighbors in the bill. What for? Why do you need to compare with your neighbors? And no, it's a bit intrusive. But it's just a question. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the questions. They're good. So do you want to start? Do you have a microphone? There's a microphone right here.
Okay.
Oh, you have
I
your mic. Oh,
to-
sorry, you have yours.
Let's see. Okay, this is working. Yes. Okay. When it comes to the installation, translation, the transnational installation you were mentioning, this is a decision that is up to the utility. So is the utility taking this decision? In that case, the utility that were mentioned in Colombia and Chile are national utilities. So there is Colombia, Peru, Chile. There are no, Bolivia was even in Chile because the desert that was mentioned was on the side of Chilean utility. Was not okay. So the two that were mentioned were in Colombia and in Chile. So each utility is taking its own decision according also to the regulation that stands in the country, to the negotiation with the regulator, to the cost-benefit analysis that each utility is doing. What we are doing as Meters and More, we are providing, defining a solution, technological solution that may be used by utilities, service providers, solution providers, and equipment manufacturers. So each utility takes its own decision based on cost-benefit analysis and negotiation of the regulation and the input from the regulation.
Okay.
When it comes to the third question that was related to the comparison, again, this is an interest and the value proposition from the utility side that we're interested in showing to the customer how he is behaving compared to its own customer in order to give some much more information on whether he is using much more energy or fewer energy, and so to take actions based on that. So whether your customer, whether your neighborhood is consuming half of the energy compared to you, probably you have to do something in your home or take into consideration that mainly you have 2 times the children compared to the average of your neighborhoods. But this is much more information that can be useful for putting the customer at the forefront and giving him information in order to having better energy consumption habits.
David, I think the other, was that for you? I don't know, the buffering?
The buffering, no.
Maybe we tailor this, maybe you can ask afterwards.
What was
Lucis, who presented this. Let's do one more question, then we're going to close the panel.
Hello, my name is Pierre Braun. I'm working for Euroelectric, so the European Association of Electricity Industry, and specifically in the DSO unit. I would like to ask a question as regard the regulation angle, and I would like to know if you are sufficiently equipped by regulation to invest in digitalizations, and if not, what do you recommend basically to allow further investments in digitalization rather to the previous approach? Thank you.
So one of the problems we will have to tackle in the future is how the whole CAPEX system that we are remunerated, that is a problem. So if, like in the European legislation, we will have to use also Flex as a tool and as a DSO, regulation is not ready in order how to compensate that kind of action. So there are still a lot of issues to be tackled, but I think we will solve them as they come, because for the moment we don't have the need. We don't have that kind of problems yet, but yeah, in the future, as the challenge will become bigger, and I'm referring to renewable electric vehicles and batteries as a tool. If possibilities become there and the challenge become bigger, we also will have to adapt to using Flex as a tool, as a DSO. But regulation is not ready. That's one of the problems we have to tackle. Yes.
Very good.
From a TSO perspective, I can add that we've just entered in negotiations with our regulator to establish the tariffs for the upcoming 4 years, and we have just an approval of our tariff file last week, which is containing also an ambitious program on digitalization and investment in digital. So from a TSO perspective, I think our regulator is quite open and supportive on initiatives that we take in the benefit of society, of course, on digitalization. Yeah.
Nice. Excellent. You have one very quick comment?
Quick comment, yeah. Let's not think only about Europe. USA is an example. Every state has their own regulation. And for instance, let me just put a clear example. In the New York state, Iberdrola is stopped to deploy smart metering because still it has not been agreed, the rate case, with the regulator. In spite that the New York City is deploying the smart metering. So this is the situation. There are many regulators getting different opinions. In Europe, I agree with my colleagues that they are basically doing a positive job, but I would underline we need a flexible regulation, very much oriented to innovation. That would be my
That's a good
there you
comment.
see also emerge some sandboxing phases in regulation as well. So first steps are taken into organizing also the possibility to have innovative approaches a little bit outside of the classical regulation. So you see that regulators are also evolving.
Flexible regulation. I think that's a good. That's a
That's
good
a nice
closing.
word.
Let's see if that happens. So I took 3 things away. I think digitalization is well on its way. I think it's needed for a changing world who also tries to address very hard less carbon, zero carbon emissions, etc. So we're on a good path. So I'm glad to hear you're moving fast, and more have to move fast. I think the second point is the networks have to be ready, so a lot of other stuff has to be done on the hardware, on the infrastructure side. And the third element I take away is so the consumer centricity becomes a lot more relevant than it ever has been. And I'm glad you're all involved, you're all driving it. So from a TSO, DSO, TSO, so both us from a technology perspective and then the alliances. So a lot of things have to come together to make this work, and I want to thank you all for participating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.